then, oh wait, I was going to get back to the text, except not quite yet. Announcements. Just a couple announcements. So I not only have announcements about our regional moots, which are coming up, but I have some specific things. New England Moot. I just wanted to confirm we are taking registration through up to the day of the event. We don't have to. And I'm always delighted when we can do this. There's nothing I hate more than closing registration way in advance of an event. Drives me crazy. So we are going to be able to have the registration open until the day before the event, I think. Not to say that it isn't a good idea to register sooner, of course, but there's no deadline other than the actual event itself for that. So that's really cool. And that deadline, of course, is the 29th of September, just a few weeks hence, here in September. And we're going to be down in Amherst, Massachusetts, and that's going to be so looking forward to New England Moot. So that's all really fun. And oh yeah, no, I'm not sharing my screen yet, but it's okay. I've not got anything big going on here, just my cover slide. Anyway, yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, right. So there is so if you want to make sure you can order your lunch, then you have to register at least 3 days in advance. But if you want to come and take your chances on lunch, you can still register up to the end of things. Matt's asking if anything is going on for Hobbit Day. Yeah, not 100% sure what yet, but definitely going to do something or other. Still working on ironing that out. So, but yeah, something's definitely coming up. Of course, we're coming up as we always do this time of year on our fall fundraising campaign. So I'll be definitely doing some announcements about that soon, hopefully next week. So anyway, so yeah, New England Moot. Very soon, our first gathering up here in New England. So that's going to be great. So again, just go to signumuniversity.org/events, and you will be able to find all the options there for our 2 moots that are coming up soonest, which are New England Moot, as I say, and also Middle Moot out in Waterloo, Iowa on the 12th of October, which is our second soonest moot. And the announcement about that, there is a tentative schedule available now for Middle Moot. The Middle Moot people, as always, super organized. Again, if you go to the Middle Moot page on the signumuniversity.org/event page, you'll be able to find the details for our for the schedule. There, the tentative schedule for that event. So anyway, definitely wanted to put those together. And yes, Evil Dr. Cannon, we do have Tex Moot lined up. Tex Moot is definitely happening. We don't have registration open for that yet. But I'm just going to try to confirm the date here. The 8th, September 8th of February. September 8th is when Saturday, February 8th. That's the date. That's the date. Saturday, February 8th is Tex Moot this coming year. So that is certainly happening. Yep. So that's and there are 2 others that should be happening even sooner than that. We're gonna have 2 others this fall, which we're finalizing the details on. Magnolia Moot and Bay Moot are definitely both going to be happening. Magnolia Moot down near in the area of Charlotte, North Carolina, and then Bay Moot out in the California Bay area around San Francisco. So those 2 are going to be happening either. Magnolia Moot is likely to be either the last weekend of October or the first weekend of November, and Bay Moot is likely to be down towards the end of November, right before Thanksgiving. That's neither one absolutely nailed down yet, but we're getting close. We're getting very close on those. So if you're in those areas, you can look forward to that. And yes, also LA Moot is looking very likely for late February. Got some confirmation about that today as well. Super fun venue this year for LA Moot in particular. No, I'm not going to say until it's absolutely confirmed. I don't want to spill that one until it's absolutely confirmed. But it's going to be cool. I'm really excited. Anyway, so lots of cool stuff coming up in the Moot world. So please do keep an eye on that, including save the date. We have confirmed the dates for Myth Moot 7. Myth Moot this coming year. will be at the end of June. It will be June 25th through 28th of 2020. That is Mythmoot 7. And the theme this year is going to be defying and defining the darkness. Defying and defining the darkness is the theme of the theme of Mythmoot for this coming year. It's based on a quote from the Diary of Anne Frank, actually. Really cool theme. So anyway, that's what we're looking at for Mythmoot this year, and we're definitely going to do Mootcast again for Moot. So let's see things I can confirm about Mythmoot. Same location. I love the NCC. I've really enjoyed our last few years down there at Mythmoot. So same place, Leesburg, Virginia. 25th to the 28th of June. Defying and defining the darkness is the theme, and the prices are going to be the same. There's not going to be any increase in the costs for the venue this year and stuff. So we're able to keep the ticket prices the same as last year. Same with Mootcast as well. So those are the things that I can say about Mythmoot planning. Any reenactments planned? Well, not yet, Tomas. We'll have to see where we get. I think we might do a reenactment at Middlemoot again. Like Middlemoot is where we did the what do you call it? The Weathertop attack last year. We might do a slightly less action-packed reenactment this year. Namely, we've been talking about reenacting the feast at Rivendell, because we're trying to sort out the seating arrangements at Elrond's table in the feast in Rivendell. So we might have to do some reenactment of the seating arrangements there. Anyway, oh yeah, Karita, did you see the picture on the Mythmoot page? you totally should if you haven't, because you're kind of featured. So anyway, it's all good. Yeah, there's a prominent picture of Asphaleth and Frodo headed towards the ford on the page right now. So yeah, Karita, you should absolutely check that out. Anyway, so that is the Moot news that is going on here, and there was another thing. What was my other thing? Hang on, I gotta check my other thing here. Oh yeah, I remember the other thing. The other thing is, so tomorrow night we're having another film session. It's been a few weeks since we've done another film session, and I had to do a new link for that because I messed up the GoToWebinar thing. So we have to do a new GoToWebinar link. So those people who join me on GoToWebinar for Film will need to click on the new link, which is on the Film page on mythgard.org. That was the thing. Okay. Glad I remembered the thing. Very good. Okay, so with that, let us get back into the text here. Today's reading. Okay, hang on. Let me explain when I say today's reading. My aspiration for today is to include. I called today's class Ancillary Myths because I want to cover those two kind of bonus myths that Tolkien has sort of folded in here in this second part of the Notion Club papers. We have seen him, of course, dealing very centrally with the Atlantis myth, right? The way that he's been thinking about Numenor and everything. Obviously, it's been a really huge deal. But he then adds these two other things in the content, in the section of the reading I want to cover tonight, from the beginning of the Imram, from the beginning of the poem about the voyage and subsequent death of Saint Brendan, up through King Sheev, right, in his discussion of King Sheev. So we have those two other sort of mythic elements, right? The Saint Brendan, the navigator mythic element, and the King Sheev mythic element. And I want to look at how he's kind of bringing all those things together with that central theme that he's been working on, which is the Atlantis theme, and not just the Atlantis theme by itself, but sort of the echoes of that Atlantis theme throughout, northwestern Germanic history, right? As he's been sort of tracing that. So let's start with that, because we almost got through all my slides last time, but not quite. We had just gotten to the part where the big storm came through, right? Where the Atlantis myth exploded into like across the UK, right? And into this massive primary world storm, which was the Great Storm, right? Which was this, the biggest storm on record. Which, you may remember that Raymer had said that sometimes these mythics, you remember they were talking about the power of myth and legend and things like that. And Raymer had made that kind of cryptic comment about how it, that is to say, myths, right, can sometimes explode even into the primary world. And that was a little unclear at the time exactly what that meant, right? And especially what he meant by explode exactly, right? And then, of course, when it comes to it, we have it's almost literally an explosion, right? I mean, remember, even there was like the meteorological report about how the storm puzzled weathermen, not only because they didn't see it, it seemed to come out of nowhere, right? But the track of the storm was really strange. It was like a series of explosions across the British Isles. As if, which suggests, of course, that myth was breaking in at several different points, geographical points across the British Isles. Not just, so this was not a rolling storm front which swept across the island. This was a series of meteorological explosions, improbable, indeed impossible as far as conventional explanation apparently went. So it turns out, apparently, that when Raymer says that these myths can explode into the primary world, he meant it almost literally, right? Yeah, so let's, oh wait, but then after that, okay, so I was saying, after the storm, you remember Raymer found that piece of paper which Loudon left behind. Loudon and Jeremy went off in the middle of the storm, like everyone thought they were going to die or like drown out there in the storm. So they walked off in the middle of the storm, and not only did they walk off in the middle of the storm, they walked off like in their Numenorian personae, right? They were like not living in our current time and place, right? They were in the midst of coming into contact with the Numenorian situation. And it was in that context that they wandered off. And then they got a letter from them saying that they're going to not be back for several months. And now, so tonight, we're going to be looking at the way in which, like, what did they do, right? And what exactly is happening with them, and how can we begin to understand this? But Raymer found this piece of paper. So Loudon had brought with him to that last meeting where the storm broke out. He had brought with him this sheet of paper, which was from his father's diary, and it was covered with a strange script that he couldn't understand, right? So he was, brought it in as like a piece of evidence, right? And Raymer found it after the storm and put it in his desk. So this is where at the next meeting where they are not, that is Loudon and Jeremy are still not back, we get this account of Guildford's meeting with Raymer, and Raymer explaining that he figured it out, right? He solved the key of the script and found that, ironically, the reason that Loudon had not been able to translate that page himself is that he assumed that the language was Adonaic, right? He assumed it was the Numenorian language because it appeared to be in Numenorian script. Right, I mean, it was in some script that he was, that he was assuming was Numenorian script, and so he assumed that it was in the Numenorian language. But Raymer says, actually, no, it's not, and he's gonna be like amused or frustrated when he finds out it was actually an Anglo-Saxon, only transliterated into the Anglo-Saxon or into the Numenorian script. So Raymer realized a simple thing that Loudon had missed, and managed to translate the page, right? Well, with the help of a resident Anglo-Saxon scholar there in Oxford. So here's what that text actually says. The script that was written apparently by Loudon's father in Numenorian script, but in the Anglo-Saxon language. Now we sit in the land of exile, and dwell cut off from the bliss and the blessedness that once was and shall never come again. The death shade lies heavy on us, longing is on us. In former days west lay a straight way, now are all ways crooked. Far now is the land of gift. Far now is the maybe prostrate land that is cast down. Far now is the land of mirth that is fallen. Of course, the prostrate land is, the local Anglo-Saxon scholars' attempt to translate this word, which clearly means the downfallen, right? We've seen this language being used of Numenor before. So now, think through this with me here. What are the implications of this sheet? What are we seeing here in this strange script, which is, I think, Tengwar, actually. But anyway, in this strange script that the members of the Notion Club don't know, but it's Anglo-Saxon. What is the importance of that, based on the other things that we've seen? What are the other things? What's the significance of it? Any thoughts about that? What are we seeing here? Remember the way that things were unfolding to Laudum, right? Laudum was getting words, ghost words, right? That were coming. He was just getting these words that were coming through to him. He was a hearer, not a seer, right? So he was getting these words in the three different languages: the Avalonian language, the Numenorian language, and some other hodgepodge, and a bunch of Anglo-Saxon, right? And some of the Anglo-Saxon that he was getting was really important, such as the corrected passage from the Seafarer, right? So, and you'll remember that he kept coming across this one snippet, right, about how the straight path has been lost, right? All roads are now bent, right? The idea of there being something in the West, but things are changed, and the path has been lost, and now all roads are crooked, right? And remember that we got that in several different languages. In Germanic tongues, in really antique Anglo-Saxon, in more modern Anglo-Saxon. So what do we put together from that? What do we see? What's the conclusion that we can draw from that? What Laudum is hearing is that myth surviving over time, right? As the generations went, as the passage of time, which is being marked by the philological change in the languages, right? As this time is passing by, we see the continuance of this one central idea, this one central myth, right? This idea of that lost land in the West, that the path there has been lost and that all roads are now crooked, right? With a decreasing sense of what on earth that means exactly, right? It becomes just a sort of snippet, right? Well, Laudum got, that is, a much more direct access to the origin of that mythic element, right, of that mythic snippet that he was hearing kind of echoes down the centuries within the Germanic tradition. But he witnessed firsthand, right, the root of that, really. When he and Jeremy were at the windowsill, right, as the storm was coming in, and they were speaking as if they were on at the railing of a ship, right? Remember, we're told, the narrator who's Nicholas Guildford, tells us that they gave the very clear impression, right? Something told them. They could practically see, people watching could practically see that these two guys, Jeremy and Laudum, are, Alfwine and Treowine. Or no, they had Numenorian names then, didn't they? But anyway, they were on the railing of a ship, right? And they were looking out to the west at the destruction of Numenor, and they were seeing the black wind coming and pushing them away, and the waves bearing them off. And remember, I was talking last week about how powerful I find that scene. I think that scene, as the storm is breaking in the Notion Club papers, that's the moment which, for me, more than anything else Tolkien has written, really brought home to me that heart of this Númenórean myth, that myth that is the thing that is being recalled and retained, that sense of lost, and not just loss, right? You know, they've not just misplaced Numenor, right? They've been banished. It was destroyed and they've been banished. And as I said last time, I feel that I've always misunderstood that, or at least I kind of maybe have always laid the emphasis on only one part of it. I think it's perfectly valid, but it's not the only element of the story, right? The element that I've always laid the emphasis on is how the survivors of Numenor, how Elendil and his family were preserved from the downfall, right? How they were spared. And I've always looked at them as a kind of like a Númenórean, Noah's Ark parallel in a sense, right? You've got the wrath of God which descends upon Numenor, or rather makes Numenor descend rather than descending upon it, but they are spared, right? And they are spared in the ship, and they are borne away. They are borne away by the great waves, but even the being borne away by the great waves, I always took as itself an element of mercy, right? Again, they're being carried to safety and borne up on the wings of storm to Middle-earth, which always, again, struck me as a kind of a good thing, right? Like the special grace of the family of Elendil being born on the wings of storm. That is not the emphasis in this text, right? That is not the story that Laudum and Jeremy undergo and to perceive happening around them. They feel the wrath of God directed against them. They are being banished, and they are aware of the fact, not just that so they're not only lamenting, right? Like, oh, it's nice for us to be alive, but we're really sad that everybody else is dead and that our home is gone. It's not only that. They feel that they have been cut off from the West, and that's what lingers, right? That's what we see lingering, or rather, that's what Laudum hears lingering through generation after generation of Germanic descendants of the people who came into contact with those Númenóreans who did survive, with the descendants of the, Laudum, Jeremy analogs, right, from Numenor. So that's been the key. So this text, therefore, right, is a full version, right? So one simple way to look at this Anglo-Saxon text, right, is this is the longer version of which that one sentence snippet that kept coming through is only a fragment, right? This is like the longer thing of which that shorter later thing is a fragment, right? But it's more than just that, right? The fact that this is in Anglo-Saxon but written in Númenórean script suggests that there is some way in which this is actually closer to the origins, as if like this was written by this text, this page that was written down by Laudum's father, who presumably received this stuff in a similar way to how Laudum was receiving things. He also got pictures and sounds, ghost words, right, and things like that. However he would describe it. Remember, that's what happened to Laudum when he came in with those fragments, the ABBA fragments. Remember, we were looking at those last time. He saw the text and wrote down what he remembered of it, right? Presumably, it was a similar thing that happened to Laudum's dad in this page of script that Laudum couldn't figure out, right? Therefore, my understanding of that would be that this text is a transcription of a text which at least has its origin in something written by the Númenóreans in Europe, right? After they had been banished, after they have arrived here at our Middle Earth, and are now living among, these Germanic cultures who live by the sea up here in, the northwestern part of Middle Earth. And they So they've learned the language, right? So this is written by a Numenorian who has learned Anglo-Saxon, but is writing Anglo-Saxon in his Numenorian script as well, right? So that makes this a really, really important text, which again, Loudon didn't really understand. And notice I said it's like the fuller part, of which the later stuff is only a fragment or a memory. Now we sit in the land of exile and dwell cut off from the bliss and the blessedness that once was and shall never come again. The death shade lies heavy on us. Longing is on us. In former days west lay a straight way, now are all ways crooked. That's the fragment that's going to be retained, right? Far now is the land of gift. Far now is the prostrate land that is cast down. Far now is the land of mirth that is fallen. Notice like the part that comes at the beginning and the end, there seems to be one really important strain through that. And it relates to something that a couple of you are saying. Karita, I agree, Land of Mirth is a very striking name. And Tarlonio on the Twitch chat was also just saying that Numenor never struck me as a land of mirth. Now, I agree, Tarlonio, certainly not since Sauron has arrived has it really been a land of mirth. But anyway, I agree. That's a very striking description, right? And again, this is yet another thing. Well, not another thing, maybe just another way of saying the same thing that I've always missed about the Numenor legend, about the myth of Numenor as Tolkien was envisioning it here, especially as he was envisaging the Numenorian exiles. I had always understood the laments for Numenor, like the things that are said at the very end of the Akallabeth, right, where where Numenor is given that name, about which to me I always read that as like, we miss our home, right? Our home was awesome. Our home is gone. We can never go home again. So that's sad. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm down with that kind of longing, right? But this is much more than that. I mean, look at the exile. It starts with exile. Where they are is a land of exile. They are cut off from the bliss and the blessedness that once was and shall never come again. This is not home. Right? They're not, it's not their, they're not speaking of like, of a patria, of a fatherland, right? That's not that's not the language that they're using here. The bliss and the blessedness that once was and shall never come again. Far now is the land of mirth that is fallen. Far now is the land of gift. What it sounds like, and yeah, Brian, there've certainly been concepts of the land of gift. That idea, if I'm remembering correctly, Loudon mentioned that early on. That word for Numenor, which translates land of gift, was one of the words that came through to Loudon earlier on. So we've already heard about that. But again, you put these things together. What is the pattern? The land of mirth, the land of gift, cut off from the bliss and blessedness that once was and shall never come again. And what is their current life like? The death shade lies heavy on us. Longing is on us. What they make this sound like? Yes, Tomas, exactly what I was thinking. It sounds like they've been kicked out of Eden, right? This sounds like a fall. Not an exile, merely an exile, right? Not a longing for home, right? Not the kind of longing that, like a hobbit would have if he was, couldn't ever go back to the Shire. That's not what we're talking about, right? What we are talking about is a fall, something like a fall. They feel it to be a fall anyway, right? This is more than just geographic exile, certainly, and it is much more than merely a sentimental attachment to this land, to the land of their birth, the land of their home, right? The world has changed. They are cut off from the bliss and blessedness that once was and shall never come again. The death shade lies heavy on us. Adam and Eve could have said that. Like those words, unaltered, right, could have been uttered by Adam and Eve, right, after they'd been kicked out of Eden. It's like that is exactly applicable. And then, of course, that itself puts Land of Gift in a different context there, right? Yeah, Land of Gift in the sense in which Eden was a gift, paradise was a gift, right? And that it was a kind of paradise, and that is why I think we have Land of Mirth. And I agree, Land of Mirth, counterintuitive, right? I mean, I don't think most of us would if you say like, give me something that you associate with Numenor, mirth would probably have been pretty far down on the list, right? Yeah, sure, they were blessed, they were happy, they were fortunate, they were, but like having fun, right? That's like joy, not necessarily what we might first associate with Numenor, but yes, in this context, they definitely are. The mirth that was, the joy that was, shall never come again. The world has changed. They have been banished. They are in a land of exile in more than one sense. And yeah, Stephen, I agree. It is a second example, like the Tralalalali elves, right, where people tend to think of like elves as being super serious, and that's why they have such a hard time with the Tralalalali section. And again, I think that's kind of their problem, not the elves' problem, really. But anyhow, yeah. So now, I mean, the fall of Numenor, it's not like this concept, the concept of the parallelism between the fall of Numenor and the fall of Adam and Eve. It's not like that never occurred to me, right? I mean, I've often talked about it as when there are several like typological, moments in the Silmarillion where that idea of the fall is sort of typologically recapitulated, right? I mean, we certainly get it with the Noldor, and with Melkor playing the serpent role, right? We get certainly something that is much like a fall there, this other moment, the corruption of Numenor with Sauron this time playing the role of the serpent, always struck me as being typologically significant in that way. The element that I'd never gotten is that the faithful are like Adam and Eve, banished from the garden, right? That's the part that never get. I always thought of Ar-Pharazôn as like Adam and Eve, right? And the Numenorians, the Kingsmen, who went with him to invade, to invade the Blessed Realm. Yeah, sure, absolutely. They were getting kicked out of Eden with extreme prejudice, right? I got that. But this is a thing that was always lost on me before. And remember, this is what echoes down, right? This is what echoes, and not only just sort of vertically down in history in this like one little area, but like across geography, right? In different cultures, from different languages, and different sort of linguistic perspectives. We're getting this same myth being repeated and re-echoed. In former days, west lay a straight way, now are all ways crooked. It's less personal, right? It doesn't have the clarity of what exactly has been lost, right? The memory of the bliss and the blessedness is kind of gone, right? What does it even mean to say, in former days, west lay a straight way? Straight to what, right? The memory of that doesn't seem to be retained in the fragment of the myth that survives. Though it seems fairly clear that now are all ways crooked, that's bad, right? So presumably whatever was off to the west along the straight way was good, right? But again, it's all kind of vague and impersonal by the time we get down to like the Gothic and Anglo-Saxon echoes of that statement. But it is much more personal. Again, another reason why this begins to feel like the original version, like the first generation Numenorians writing this after they've landed. Okay, so old Rashbold, of course. Rashbold is the name of the Anglo-Saxon expert, and of course, as Christopher says, this is an inside joke. Rashbold, of course, is the literal translation of Tolkien's name from German, Rashbold or foolhardy. Old Rashbold, the Anglo-Saxon scholar, is of course Tolkien himself. And of course, he makes him this like old duffer, right? Who is totally clueless about everything else and only knows his Anglo-Saxon. Of course, when old Rashbold said the style has the air of a translation, he simply meant that the fabricator had not been quite successful in making the stuff sound like natural Anglo-Saxon. So Rashbold doesn't think it's very good Anglo-Saxon, right? Like somebody was faking it. So basically Rashbold reads this and he says, it has the air of a translation, which is his polite way of saying, this is done by a modern person who's doing something cute with this script, right? They've made this, this is not an original Anglo-Saxon utterance, right? It's not quite right. And he is thinking that the fabricator had not been quite successful in making this stuff sound like natural Anglo-Saxon. I can't judge that, Raymer says. But I dare say he is right, though his implied explanation may be wrong. This probably is a translation out of some other language into Anglo-Saxon, but not, I think, by the man who penned the page, that is, Loudham's father. He was in a hurry, or like Airy trying to catch the evanescent, and if he had had any time for translation, he would have done it into modern English. I can't see any point in the Anglo-Saxon unless what he saw was already in it. I say saw, for this stuff looks to me like the work of a man copying out all he had time to see, or all he found still intact and legible in some book. Again, like Loudham received that picture of the script that he translated and that we talked about last time. So again, this would seem to confirm what we were talking about, right? The reason that the Anglo-Saxon in this text, the reason that the Anglo-Saxon in this text doesn't sound like true Anglo-Saxon is because it's being written by a Numenorian, who is in fact translating from Adunaic into Anglo-Saxon, right? So it's not by a modern person, but by an ancient person translating. Yes, Devorah, it is really funny that old Rashbold thought this was really boring, right? He was like, yeah, whatever, I don't have time for this nonsense anymore. Devorah, I loved that comment, Rashbold, whose name is Tolkien, being like, I don't have time for this kind of thing, right? I have a job to do. I don't have my time is not infinite, right? That was hilarious. So, Carrie, the implication, therefore, is that this is written by a Numenorian who has settled down here and learned the language, right? So I say first generation, but that doesn't mean first instant, right? So this is someone who presumably still remembers Numenor himself. And I say he because all of our recurring characters are all masculine here. He seems to remember Numenor, but he doesn't. He's clearly learned, I think, Anglo-Saxon. That hint, I think anyway, it's clearly that direction rather than the other. That is to say, rather than him just uttering in Adunaic and an Anglo-Saxon scribe having learned his language and translating it to Anglo-Saxon, that seems to me a great deal less likely for several reasons. But of course, the thing which would seem to me absolutely to seal that is that it's written in Numenorian script, right? So even though he has translated the language, he hasn't written it out like an Anglo-Saxon would. He's written it out like a Numenorian would. But it's the Numenorian script which, to Raymer, and which makes perfect sense, makes it seem so very unlikely that this could possibly have been invented by by old Professor Loudon, right? Ares' father. It's almost certainly something that he discovered, right? Or that he kind of came into contact with. Anyway, okay. So thinking about this, thinking about how then the Númenórean myth comes into contact with the Germanic world and what we've learned here about how that happened. So the Númenóreans came, they settled down in this Germanic world, they learned the language, and although they are dead and gone, and they're no longer any obvious evidence of direct descendants of the Númenóreans who came and dwelt among them, nevertheless the presence of that repeated mythic phrase about the crooked roads suggests that culturally a memory is retained of this myth, right, of this story of Númenor that is fallen and lost. Okay, great. At this point, then, Tolkien brings in to the Notion Club papers these two other myths, and we'll do them one at a time, of course. And we begin with the poem, with the Imram, and this is Frankly, right? This is Philip Frankly, the one with the horror borealis who hates all northern things, and is getting sick and tired of the Anglo-Saxon, and who makes fun of the philologists. He has written a poem that he wants to read out. So it's totally unrelated to anything else, right? This is just like the contribution of a completely separate Notion Club member who is reading a poem which has nothing to do with the rest of this, except it kind of does seem to have something to do with the rest of this. And they begin asking him, like, how did this come through to him, in fact? There are the three central images, so that you'll remember the plot of the poem, right, is that St. Brendan the Navigator has gone off from his Irish monastery and has sailed off into the west, and he returns having had marvelous naval adventures, kind of like, though presumably more pacific than those of Earendel that never got written. Anyway, so he returns back and he says primarily there are three things that he saw. There was a mountain, a tree, a and a star. Those are the three things that he saw, right? And, those of us familiar with the Silmarillion and with the Lord of the Rings say mountain, tree, and star, and we have all kinds of associations that pop up, right? What did St. Brendan see when he went into the West? The very idea that St. Brendan went off into the West had this remarkable sort of myth, spiritual experience, right? Encountered these amazing things and returned. We are already prepared, based on the mythic foundation that has been laid, to understand that St. Brendan basically found the straight path and went into the West, right? So that's what happened. Also, keep in mind the significance, or at least the irony, but I think it's not merely irony. The irony of this St. Brendan traveling on the, into the West on the straight road in a story which began talking about the mechanism of space travel, right? So, like, I went off in a boat and found myself on the straight road and end up in what could practically, at this point, be a different planet now, right? Anyway, so that's by itself a little bit interesting. But anyway, okay, so here's the mountain. Here's St. Brendan's encounter with the mountain. Upreared from sea to cloud, then sheer a shoreless mountain stood. Its sides were black from the sullen tide to the red lining of its hood. No cloak of cloud, no lowering smoke, no looming storm of thunder in the world of men saw I ever unfurled like the pall that we passed under. We turned away, we left astern the rumbling and the gloom. Then the smoking cloud asunder broke, and we saw that tower of doom. On its ashen head was a crown of red, where fires flamed and fell. Tall as a column in high heaven's hall, its feet were deep as hell. Grounded in chasms the water drowned and buried long ago. It stands, I ween, in forgotten lands, where the kings of kings lie low. What did he see? I don't mean to treat this as if it's just a riddle, like, there's the riddle. What's the answer, right? I don't mean that, but what is this? If you just told me Sam Brendan sails off into the west, presumably finds the straight road, and comes upon a super high solitary mountain, if that's the only piece of information you get, what do you expect? What would you expect? That's the only piece of information that you're given. Found the straight path into the west, and boom, big mountain. You would, again, within the Tolkien mythos, right? Knowing that it's the straight road, or I don't want to say knowing, presuming that it's the straight road that Brendan found. Yeah, it sounds like you would think it would be Taniquetil, right? The holy mountain. On the shores, right, or near the shores, anyway, of Valinor, right? That's the mountain I would expect. But yeah, James, way back, I agree. This doesn't sound like Taniquetil. That's my expectation, right? Sam Brendan, all this straight road, crooked roads talk and stuff, and then we're getting this poem, and I'm starting to read the poem, and he says a mountain, and I'm like, okay. A mountain and a tree. I'm like, okay, I think maybe I know what the tree is, right? And a star. Okay, I'm there, right? Star, at least, I feel real confident in. Tree, I'm feeling pretty good about it. Like, it's probably going to be the white tree of like Elvenhome, right? So just like, remember they gave a scion of that tree to the Númenóreans, and that's of course what then the seedling of that tree gets taken. Isildur takes the fruit, right? So we've got a white tree, right, in Elvenhome. So, right, that's going to be cool, right? So we got that tree. We've got the star, obviously. We've got Earendil's star, no problem. Especially since Earendil's name's all over the place, and of course Taniquetil. So, site of Valinor, site of Elvenhome, and the Flammifer of the West that's flying above, and that is kind of not exactly the bridge, but kind of going between the West and the East, right? That you can see him from our world, but of course he can't return to our world. So that this idea of like that which connects the two of them. So again, just from St. Brendan saying mountain, tree, star, I've got it, right? I've got the whole story nailed. I don't need to read the rest of the poem, right? I'm good, except it's a good thing we read the rest of the poem, because this is not what we're seeing. Now, Stephen, you're also right. It seems like he could be describing The Lord of the Rings, potentially, or at least parts of it. Yeah, theoretically possible, of course, because he's been writing it when he's getting to this part. But anyway, so back to what we see again. A shoreless mountain stood. Upreared from sea to cloud, then sheer, a shoreless mountain stood. Already this doesn't sound like Taniquetil, right? Because if there is one thing that we know we should expect to find at Valinor, it's a shore, right? Faerie famously has shores, as celebrated in the poem The Shores of Faerie, right, earlier on. And of course, like, we need to have beaches with pearls strewn on them and all that kind of thing, right? So we even if we're going to have a mountain, right, even if it's Taniquetil we're looking at, it's totally going to be behind a beach, at least, right? If not a fair bit more inland than that. So the fact that this is a mountain that is uprearing straight from the sea, right? So you've got sides of mountain, water breaking against the sides of the mountain. So we're already clearly, geographically speaking, or like topographically speaking, not talking about Taniquetil. Its sides were black from the sullen tide to the red lining of its hood. It's red and black. Those are not the colors of Taniquetil, right? It's black with a red lining at the top. Oh wait, and it's surrounded by clouds. No cloak of cloud, no lowering smoke, no looming storm of thunder in the world of men saw I ever unfurled like the pall that we passed under. Okay, super, super dark pall of lowering smoke. Does sound a bit on the volcanic side, right? Definitely. But I mean, is this Mount Doom? I mean, is this Orodruin? No, there's no ocean there, right? Um, is this? But remember, a volcano isn't necessarily what we're seeing here, right? I mean, it's a logical thought given the cloud slash smoke slash storm of thunder slash Paul, right? Those are the things that are used to describe it. Sure, volcano definitely could accomplish that. But again, that's not necessarily, I think, what is being described. Or let me say this a different way. Remember where we are narratively, right? Remember what just happened 2 pages ago in the Notion Club papers, right? We had this massive storm, right? This storm, which still on the day that, Philip Frankly reads this poem to the Notion Club, you've still got British meteorologists saying things like, no looming storm of thunder in the world of men saw I ever unfurled like the one that passed through a couple weeks back, right? So we already have some pretty clear associations with a very massive, enormously impressive, and enormously oppressive as well, black storm, right? So given what we know, right? Again, my first guess, even though we've not been talking about Taniquetil at any time, that would have been my first guess, right, of what you would find if you sailed the straight road to the west. Instead, what it's beginning to sound like is that St. Brendan found Numenor, in some sense. Did he travel in time as well as space? Not really sure. Could happen, based on what we've seen here in the Notion Club papers. But let's look at this a little bit more. On its ashen head was a crown of red where fires flamed and fell. Is that a volcano? It's tricky. It sounds like a volcano, but I don't think that's a volcano. In fact, I think that's the opposite of a volcano, right? He's not saying that the crown of red on its ashen head, where fires flamed and fell. Doesn't mean that he's not saying that flames are falling from the head of the mountain. I think. I think he's saying that fire fell upon the head of the mountain. That's why its head is ashen, because its head has been burned. Which Stephen does make it sound a little altar-like, right? In fact, Stephen, I would go a step further and say it sounds a little bit Mount Carmel-ish, actually. At least a little reminiscent of that sort of altar, right? Tall as a column in high heaven's hall, its feet were deep as hell. So the feet of this mountain go down all the way down into hell-ish, Grounded in chasms the water drowned and buried long ago. It stands, I ween, that is, the feet of that mountain stand in forgotten lands where the kings of kings lie low. Yeah, Nancy, I think you're clearly right about the island that he's seeing. What he's seeing is the top of the Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven, which, remember, has been a subject of comment, right? Not of much explanation, mind. We've not learned, actually, much about the Meneltarma, but it's been referred to a couple times. So we should kind of have that in our heads. Is St. Brendan traveling back in time? No, not traveling back in time. He is seeing post-downfallen Numenor, right? What he is seeing sticking up out of the water is the top of the pillar of heaven, the top of Meneltarma, that column in high heaven's hall, right? But its feet are as deep as hell. At the foot of this mountain is Grounded in chasms, the water drowned and buried long ago, it stands, I ween, in forgotten lands where the kings of kings lie low. Remember those obscure Anglo-Saxon words which meant things like kings of kings, right? The lordly men and stuff. It's the land of the Numenorians, right? That has been sunk as deep as hell, right? But still the head, the crowned but ashen head of the Meneltarma stands above the water. So apparently that is one of the things that you find if you go out on the straight road. A glimpse, and not a happy glimpse, of Akallabeth, of the downfallen, right? Of Atalanta. Okay, so not what I was expecting to see. Not what I was expecting St. Brendan to encounter, though more topical, right? In more closely connected to what we've been looking at, what we've been talking about. Bruce, I agree. That line does stand out. The sound of that line, the on its ashen head was a crown of red, where fires flamed and fell. That's a pretty remarkable pair of lines, right? Bruce is pointing out that although there are other internal rhymes in other lines, like for instance, then the smoking cloud asunder broke, right? So smoking and broke, we get that sound repeated in that line, but it doesn't come on the beats, right? It's not anything like as even as on its ashen head was a crown of red where fires flamed and fell. And of course, we also get the alliteration on that second line, which we also get in other places like High Heavens Hall, for instance. But yeah, that does really make that line jump out, because we never really we don't get the internal rhyme that smoothly anywhere else. And indeed, I would, Bruce, also just kind of expand that to say those first lines are weird. Yeah, oh, Bruce, that's really cool. Bruce is pointing out that the second to last line in this passage would work perfectly if it were ordered differently, right? If he said, I ween it stands in forgotten lands where the kings of kings lie low, it would fit perfectly. But he's inverted the order, Bruce, as I think you're implying, almost as if to avoid that. Instead of saying, I ween it stands in forgotten lands, he says, it stands, I ween, in forgotten lands. So you still do get the sound connection between stands and lands, but it doesn't land on the half lines like you get with on its ashen head was a crown of red. It's a wonderful observation, Bruce. But again, the observation I would add on top of that, could you hear how strange and irregular? I think it's irregular. I'm not 100% sure. I'd need to spend a little more time with this poem than I got a chance to do to be sure about this. But the tendency is for the second line to be fairly regularly iambic. A shoreless mountain stood, to the red lining of its hood, a little more awkward. No looming storm of thunder, like the pall that we passed under, the rumbling and the gloom, and we saw that tower of doom, right? I'm reading just the short lines, the 3-beat lines. And those are much more regular, but those first lines, the 4-beat lines, are strange. Upreared from sea to cloud then sheer, its sides were black from the sullen tide, no cloak of cloud, no lowering smoke. In the world of men saw I ever unfurled. We turned away, and we left astern. Then the smoking cloud asunder broke. None of those lines are regular iambic lines. Dun 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 dun. We get that in more often in the short lines. A shoreless mountain stood. That's a perfect iambic line. Perfect iambic trimeter line. A shoreless mountain stood. We almost never get a perfect iambic tetrameter line in the longer lines. They all have that awkward beat, extra syllables. The stresses are kind of scattered a little bit strangely. I was trying to see if there's a clearer pattern. I think there might be a pattern. If it might be not really an iambic pattern, the sort of falling into an iambic pattern in the second part. But anyway, I wasn't, like I said, I didn't fully have time to look at it. But yeah, we do, Devora, get repeated sounds. Again, like Bruce was pointing out, we get a lot of that sort of internal rhyme, but again, not on the beats. Upreared, sheer, cloak smoke, as we talked about, world unfurled, sides tied. Yeah, we get a lot of pairings like that in those it turned astern, right? I mean, almost every one of them, right? Upreared, sheer, sides tied, cloak smoke, world unfurled, turned astern, smoking broke, head red, of course, as we said. Tall hall, grounded drowned, and stands lands. Yeah, every single one of them we get some kind of internal rhyme in that first line. But again, they tend to be more at the beginning and the end of the line. So again, I'm not convinced that there's no pattern there. It's just not smooth. It doesn't fit with the ictus of the poem, with the iambic feel that certainly those short lines inspire, right? So it's structurally, in this way, it's a really interesting. Well, I shouldn't say structurally. Structure would be thinking about the stanza and everything. But as far as like the rhythm and the rhythm and rhyme, it's sort of a weird poem. Well, let's go on and we'll continue to trace that. Let's look at so here's the tree. So we got Mount Doom, Pillar of Doom, and then we get the white tree. We deemed then, maybe, as in a dream, that time had passed away, and our journey ended, for no return we hoped but there to stay. In the silence of that hollow isle, in the stillness then we sang, softly us seemed, but the sound aloft like a pealing organ rang. Then trembled the tree from crown to stem, from the limbs, the leaves, and air, as white birds fled in wheeling flight, and left the branches bare. From the sky came dropping down on high a music not of bird, not voice of man, nor angel's voice, but maybe there is a third, fair kindred in the world yet lingers, beyond the foundered land. Yet steep are the seas and the waters deep, beyond the white tree strand. Okay. Well, the overall theme here, let me ask this. So, whom are they encountering? Whom is St. Brendan encountering? I don't mean the tree specifically. Whom? Who? In general terms, I don't need a first name, right? What peoples is he encountering here? Yes, elves. Exactly. I'm sure most of you are thinking, well, I think it might be elves, but I'm not 100% sure. Yes, elves, definitely elves. And this is in the voice of Saint Brendan, remember, and so he is speaking just as medieval people, when they did speak of elves, generally spoke of them, right? This idea that there was a third category, third meaning you've got men and you've got angels, which of course category also includes demons. That's a moral distinction, not a difference in being, right? Demons and angels are similar. They're of the same order of being. They just, play for different sides. So you've got men and you've got angels. And then there's this third thing. The elves, they didn't know what to do with elves, right? There are all these stories of creatures who are like men. They're not angels. They're not spiritual beings. They have bodies, right? So they're not just spiritual beings. Angels are all spirit. They don't have bodies. Elves have bodies, but they're not like men because they're immortal, right? So they are, and it's kind of interesting because on the Great Chain of Being, the medieval Great Chain of Being, humans are essentially like amphibious, right? You've got like the spiritual world, so you've got God and you've got the angels, and and they're all in the spiritual realm. And then you've got the things in the physical realm below that, right? Beasts, vegetables, beasts, plants, minerals, right? Those are all things that are in the physical world. And humans are the only ones who straddle the line, right? That's the thing that is unique about the place of humans in creation, according to the medieval Great Chain of Being, is that, again, the human alone is amphibious. It is like the beasts. It has a body, which has therefore things in common not only with beasts, but also with plants and with minerals, right? We have a lot in common with rocks. Solidity, for instance, right? The fact that we tend more or less to retain our shape, that is a thing we have in common with stones. But of course, we also have things in common with the angels as well. We have souls, we have spirits, we are also spiritual beings. So humans alone are kind of halfway. Well, the elves are like this weird sort of sub-halfway between humans and angels, right? Again, they're not side by side with humans. They're like this little overlapping category between angels and humans overlap. And then you've got the elves, who are immortal like the angels, but physical like the humans, and we have no idea what the state of their souls are exactly, or where they came from. And yes, in The Discarded Image, C.S. Lewis calls them longaevi, which just means the long livers, like those people who live a really long time and we don't know who they are. Because that element, their immortality, their relative deathlessness, that is the fact that they don't die of old age, because the fact that they could potentially be killed is part of several myths. But anyway, that's their distinguishing feature, is the fact that they're immortal. So anyway, so absolutely, Karita, one of the things that the medievals were extremely good at was explaining how stuff fit together, right? They were excellent at this. This is one of the things, this is on my short list of things that I think it frustrates me when modern people misunderstand. You hear a lot of modern people talk as if the medieval Catholic Church was just like all about propaganda. Like all they did was propaganda, right? So like, oh, hey, Ash, so you believe in these local gods? Yeah, we'll come in and we'll explain that away in terms of like, saints and everything. I'm not saying that is not in fact a description of what happened in one sense, but I think it's a description that fundamentally misses the point of what was actually happening. That's not how the medievals tended to think. Instead, how they thought was, okay, things happen here, right? Like there are stories about, which the people here have understood to be this local deity. Now, they don't have the full picture. Let's explain. Let's show how this fits into the bigger picture, right? Let's incorporate this, because they were fine with it, right? They were actually very accommodating to many of this. Is why, like they in many ways they totally believed a lot of the Greco-Roman tradition, like not fully, right? They would be like, oh yeah, many of these myths are lies, right? But again, like this is why they believed in the sphere of Mercury and the sphere of Mars and the sphere of Venus, right? Because there was in fact a reality that was being perceived by the ancients, right? They weren't just making this stuff up. They weren't just absolutely lying. So the medievals could explain, like, no, here's the whole system, right? Here's how. So let me tell you about the planetary beings, right? The planetary intelligences whose influence on the world delegated to them by God as part of his like delegated mechanism for like both creating and sustaining the world and perpetuating his providential plan for the world. This is how this works, right? And it was a shadow of that. It was a bit of that was being perceived by the ancients who talked about these gods, right? Anyway, so they, but they had a heck of a time with elves. They really did. It was super uncomfortable, and they really didn't know. So there were several different theories for where elves came from, and one is that they are angelic, right? They're angelic creatures who kind of who are like neutrals, right? So you've got so you've got the heavenly hosts, right? And some of them followed Satan and became demons, and some of them remain faithful to God and are the angels. And then there's some who are like on the fence, and they're like, I don't know. We're going to see how this plays out, right? And those are the elves. That's one theory, right? One way in which they tried to incorporate the stories of elves into their larger worldview. Another way is that they're the spirits of dead people, right? That these are not these are not like separate creatures. These are the spirits of the dead. It's like an underworld sort of thing, because we know the spirits of the dead survive, right? And of course, within the medieval Catholic sense, we know there's like there's purgatory and stuff, and there's so like they're not all with God in heaven right away, right? There's a process involved here. So maybe these stories of elves are maybe it's like they're the dead souls of the dead, and somewhere in this process, we don't really know. Anyway, so it's yeah, it's all they weren't quite sure what to do with the elves. So this talk, St. Brendan makes it pretty plain when he says, not voice of man nor angel's voice, but maybe there is a third fair kindred in the world yet lingers beyond the foundered land. Maybe there's something else, right? He seems, for some reason, certain that this is not an angel's voice, right? He's not hearing angels. He's hearing something else. So, not an angel, not a human. Maybe there is the third kindred, and the fact that it's a fair kindred. Certainly, Tolkien's use of the word fair attached to them should make it fairly clear to us who he's talking about there, especially since, of course, this is one of the things we would have expected St. Brendan to see or to encounter if he found the straight road. Now, so what's his encounter with the elves like? What does it have to do with the tree? It's a little weird. I shouldn't just ask you to explain this because I don't understand it myself. I'm asking because I don't understand it, and I was hoping you could explain it to me. But I'll have a go. So he does not meet the elves. He doesn't find the Cottage of Lost Play. He doesn't get to hear stories about the creation of the world and bring back a book, right? This is not St. Brendan's experience, right? St. Brendan has this much more limited, this much more strange encounter with the elves. In fact, if you would like to find the other account by Tolkien, which strikes me as most similar to this one, that is, account of an encounter between mortal and elves. The one that this reminds me of most, the one which seems to me in spirit closest to this account of St. Brendan, is the one that is published, is the poem that is published under the title The Sea Bell in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. Yeah, good. Brian says it feels a little like the dwarves disturbing the elven feasts in Mirkwood. Yeah, it does. So let's, what's the first thing you always do when you're reading a poem? Make sure you understand the plot, right? Let's just actually make sure that we go through and understand what is being described before we try to understand the significance of it. Let's make sure we know what it is. Okay. So he's not sure. Notice his uncertainty at the beginning. We deemed then maybe as in a dream. Okay, that's pretty, it's like 3 pieces of diffidence in one line there, right? That time had passed away, and our journey ended. For no return we hoped, but there to stay. So we were hoping, so when they land on this shore, and remember there are pearls on the sands here, I'm pretty sure, and I skipped that bit, but I think they're there. So they're deeming, right? They're choosing, hoping that they've arrived at their destination, right? Um, they would love to stay here. This looks like a great place. In the silence of that hollow isle, in the stillness, then we sang. Okay, so they sang a song, right? So they gather around and they sing a song. The isle is hollow. Hollow is such an interesting word. It is so close to the word hallow, but not quite. Is it a holy island? I don't know if it's a holy island or not. It's a hollow island. I don't know if it's a hallowed island as well. But in any case, when they break the stillness, when they break the silence by singing, which seems inoffensive enough, right? It's I guess it depends on what they sing. Softly us seemed, that is, they're not even being raucous, right? They're not even breaking the noise ordinances, or apparently they are. Apparently the noise ordinances are super strict here. But the sound aloft like a pealing organ rang. So their song, even though they're singing kind of softly, nevertheless, like booms across the land, right? It's almost like their song is amplified. And Tomas, it could well be that they were singing Tra-la-la-lolly or some similar kind of mirthful ditty. I wouldn't put it past St. Brendan at all. But the sound of their song is massively, at least it sounds like a pealing organ, right? Then trembled the tree from crown to stem, from the limbs, the leaves and air, as white birds fled in wheeling flight and left the branches bare. So the tree was a white tree in the sense that it was covered with what looked like white leaves, right? But when they sing, the leaves all take off as white birds in wheeling flight. Does this mean that the tree was always bare and it was just so covered in white birds that which were very apparently still and quite silent, that they just mistook them for leaves until they all took off? Or does this mean that they changed into, like they were leaves, and have transformed into birds? Or are they not that either? Is there a third possibility that the leaves, in fact, themselves just fly up because it is a simile, as white birds fled in wheeling flight? Now, if we read that as a simile, it could just be a description. But anyway, one way or another, they turn out to be birds, or at least to be like birds, and they all fly away, and the tree is left bare. That sounds bad. So this sounds like a violation has happened, right? They've come to this land, and they're like, hey, this place is awesome. Let's stay here, right? Do you think we'll be welcome here? Let's sing a song, right? Let's. I think the best thing we could do is sing a hymn, or sing an hymn, as the future King Frank of Narnia will say in The Magician's Nephew. So they're gonna sing a song, and presumably it is a cheerful and thankful song. That I don't know if it's the same hymn of Thanksgiving that Frank the cabbie sings, all about bringing in the sheaves. But in any case, they're singing. But as soon as they sing, the whiteness of the tree vanishes, and the leaves all fly away like birds, and they're left with this barren tree. That doesn't have that's not a good look, right? It looks like they are being rejected. It looks like they have transgressed. The image of Bruce, you were thinking of Frank the Cabbie too. The image of like the beautiful shining white tree, and now it's a bare tree, right? Like, a completely leafless tree. That suggests that something has been removed, right? That they don't seem to be completely welcome here. And yes, Brian and Stephen are both thinking of Bilbo and the dwarves stepping into the feasting rings of the elves, right? But remember, and that is one of the most standard traditions of elf stories, right? Of fairy stories, is a mortal blundering into the elf realm, into elf festivities, and it vanishing away when he arrives, right? But then what happens? From the sky came dropping down on high a music not of bird, Not voice of man, nor angel's voice, but maybe there is a third fair kindred in the world yet lingers beyond the foundered land. So they sing. The elves sing. And they hear the voice of the elves singing. Okay, wait, so now I'm a little bit more confused. Is this a good thing now? Maybe? Is this like they sing their song and the elves sing their song back? But it's coming down from the sky. Those weren't elves on the tree. Couldn't have been elves on the tree. But the leaves flew up into the sky, and now the song is coming down from the sky, like the direction where the white leaves, which then flew away like birds, are. I know, Tomas, it sounds really uncomfortably Tinkerbellish, doesn't it? Right? I mean, we all have this, we've been good students of Tolkien for many years, right? And the idea that a Tolkien poem is talking about little winged elves, little winged fairies, like, seems wildly discordant to us, right? That's one way to understand what St. Brendan is seeing. Another way to understand it is, again, it's not literal, right? What he's seeing is a representation. What he's seeing is what the elves want him to see, right? What he's seeing is like what the elves are communicating to him, not how they necessarily literally are. He's not necessarily seeing them in their true forms here. But yeah, I mean, Brian, they aren't ever really described saying, although they're not described in detail, this is reminding him of what I would think the shadowy isles guarding Valinor would be like. Yeah, though again, shadow isn't exactly what's being associated here. It's steep are the seas and the waters deep beyond the white tree strand. So things do get rough going, Brian, after the white tree strand, after the beach of the white tree, right? Devora, exactly, that's just what I was thinking, that this seems to me to be likely a Farian drama. This is an enchant, like the elves maybe are showing them this. Okay, so if this isn't an actual tree covered with actual leaves / birds / elves, if that's not what's actually happening, then it is a representation that the elves are showing them, right? Or like enchanting them into, they are causing to unfold around them, right? In Farian drama mechanism. Remember, we've just had Farian drama, 20 pages ago, right? We were recalling what Farian drama was at the beginning of part 2. Okay, it was more like 40 pages ago, but still, we're talking about Farian drama a few weeks back. So yeah, Devora, I would say that seems to be the likeliest explanation of what St. Brendan is experiencing here. They come to the beaches, which are strewn with pearls. Sounds like Elvenhome to me, right? Even maybe the shores of Valinor, but I think not, probably Elvenhome, because there are seas and waters beyond the White Tree Strand, right? It's probably Elvenhome. But instead of being welcomed into the Cottage of Lost Play and told all the stories like Ariel was way back in the day, St. Brendan is being treated to a Farian drama, which responds to his song, right? His song kicks it off. When they start singing, St. Brendan and co., right? When they start singing, then the elves sort of start the show, right? They reveal themselves, or at least they reveal this to St. Brendan. And if this is a Farian drama, then it's fair to ask us not only what is this, but what does it mean? Like, what are the elves communicating? What is the world? What is the story that St. Brendan is being drawn into by the Farian drama that is unfolding around him? And my answer would be, this place isn't for you. One paraphrase of the message of the elves here would be something like, you can't touch this, right? When you sing, like, you being here, right? You being here, you singing your human songs, you see the beauty, right? He calls it the white tree stand. The beauty of this shining white tree is the first picture, that St. Brendan is given, right? Here, behold the beauty of Elvenhome in this white tree, right? But if you try to, sing your songs under this white tree, the whiteness of the tree itself will go away, right? It will be left. You'll be left with a barren tree and only echoes, right? And they're still there. They're still singing down. You can still hear the song in the distance, but yeah, it's gonna be a distant thing, right? This place isn't for you. Very nice to meet you. Now go home, says Devora. Yeah, something like that. Something like that. Exactly. This is not a human realm. You can't join us. Even like your song and our song is physically separated, right? You might hear our song coming down to you from a distance, right? But we're not going to all join arms and sing together here on this island. You're not going to move in and live with us like you're kind of deeming, right? Like you're hoping for no return, right? That isn't gonna pan out. Would seem to be, again, a rather crude way of paraphrasing the message of the song here. All right, 0 for 2. How about the star? 0 for 2, I say. Maybe I get half credit for the white tree, right? I was thinking of the white tree, which was, the predecessor of the white tree of Numenor, and so maybe I'm half right. In that they reveal themselves, or that the vision does center on this white tree, which is not clearly not. They're not actually seeing the white tree of Elvenhome, right? But the fact that the elves seem to reveal themselves in association with that image, well, okay, so maybe I was partly right. I don't know. Okay, so what about the star? The star was the one, surely, that we were most confident in. And here St. Brendan doesn't even talk about it. His interlocutor in the poem has to ask him about it. Yeah, okay, that's great, St. Brendan, but what about the star? The star, yes, I saw it, high and far, at the parting of the ways, a light on the edge of the outer night, like silver set ablaze, where the round world plunges steeply down, but on the old road goes, as an unseen bridge that on arches runs, to coasts that no man knows. Okay, let's do it again. The star, yes, I saw it, high and far, at the parting of the ways, a light on the edge of the outer night, like silver set ablaze, where the round world plunges steeply down, but on the old road goes, as an unseen bridge that on arches runs to coasts that no man knows. Okay. I think I might be 3/4 right about the star. At least, I think it is the star that of which we are all thinking. But notice what he emphasizes about it. Okay, again, so what does he say? Okay, so it's high and far at the parting of the ways. What ways? Even before reading any more, we should already have a suspicion what ways we're talking about, right? The ways we're talking, what are the ways that generations and generations of Germanic peoples have been talking about, right? The straight way and the crooked ways, right? That seems to be the parting. So it's high and far at the parting of the ways, probably where the straight road, like at the entrance to the straight road, where the straight road leaves the rounded world. A light on the edge of the outer night, like silver set ablaze. Outer night. Come back to that. Where the round world plunges steeply down, but on the old road goes. Okay, confirmation. Definitely straight and crooked roads. Right? The crooked roads, they're going over, not over the edge of the world like Reepicheep wishes he could do, but rather rounded, right? It's continuing on down the round world, but the old road continues off, right? Okay. As an unseen bridge that on arches runs to coasts that no man knows. The old road is as an unseen bridge that on arches runs. So it's like a high bridge, right, with arches under it, except you don't see it. You don't see the arches. By the way, for very attentive readers with very retentive memories, arches. What should the arches make us think of? Anybody remember anything associated with the arches? Something vaguely rainbow-like? Yeah, no, not McDonald's, Stephen. Those are not the arches that we're looking for. Definitely not. The Elora Male, the Path of Dreams, right? The rainbow arch that linked the elvish lands, the places that, like, where the kids come. The kids travel the Elora Male in dreams, right, in order to get to the Cottage of Lost Play, or to the Cottage of Play. Way back, Volume 1, first half of the Volume 1, back at the very beginning of the Book of Lost Tales, we heard about that. In the oldest version of Tolkien's mythology, which is, of course, kind of like the road from Asgard to Midgard, like the Bifrost. Yeah, absolutely. Not at all unlike the Bifrost. Not the same either, but not at all unlike it as well. Anyway, I'm not saying that he's alluding to that. It's just that idea of the arches connecting the one world and the other world, the mundane world of normal life and the world of Elvenhome, right? That's an old idea. Was associated with arches back in the day. Now it's an unseen bridge, as if it's running on an arch, right? So I don't think that line just does not seem to me to have totally forgotten the Elora Male, is all I'm saying. But anyway, okay, to coasts that no man knows. Let's go back to Outer Night then. 3/4 of this little stanza seem pretty clearly to be talking about where the straight road diverges, right? So therefore, a light on the edge of the outer night, like silver set ablaze. The edge of outer night sounds like the gates of night, right? Like, I mean, because there is an outer darkness, right? You pass through the gates of night, and I mean that's where, like, you shove Morgoth through the gates of night, right? It's like what you do. That's what it sounds like at first, but I'm no longer convinced. I mean, after reading the rest of those, I don't think that's my first thought when I hear on the edge of outer night. But I don't think that that's the case. I think the edge of outer night means what is the unseen bridge crossing over, right? The idea of a bridge running on arches invites us to imagine, an arch bridge, right? A road which runs across a bridge which is supported by arches. So we're invited to imagine a bridge, not just a road, not just a path, with nothing around it. We're imagining arches underneath a bridge, which means we're imagining a gulf that is being spanned by this bridge. And that is what seems to be outer night. What he's describing as outer night here. Devora, we have no idea what the arches are anchored on, right? Our imagination is not summoned to detail quite that precise, right? But in any case, yeah, it's I think that so this experience of crossing this threshold, right, of entering onto the straight road and seeing the rounded world falling away, it's plunging steeply down, right? It's gonna feel like upward movement, being surrounded by, well, you've left the world behind, so what are you surrounded by, right? Well, to St. Brendan, apparently, it looks like outer night. It looks like the outer darkness. Which is interesting. Remember, St. Brendan does not seem to get to Valinor. We have no evidence yet, right? The mountain turns out not to be that mountain. The tree might have been at least reminiscent of that tree, but that was Elvenhome, definitely. And the star is back at the boundary where he first crossed over into this big adventure, right? It doesn't seem that he gets any further, geographically speaking. It doesn't seem he gets any further than Elvenhome. And even there, he does not get to stay very long. And he does not linger anywhere near the sunken pillar of heaven either. So he sees these things and he turns around and comes back, presumably. Numenor, which is fallen. Elvenhome, which is not hostile. He's not attacked, right? Not hostile, but not welcoming. Certainly alien and keeping its distance from him, right? Not the land, literally, but the inhabitants. And then the star. And this quite eerie experience of leaving the real world, his world, far behind, right? But he's come back. He's come back now. Why has he come back? What is St. Brendan's errand? Back to Ireland? What does he return to Ireland to do? Anybody remember? What's his goal? What's his purpose? Yeah, Brian, he's come back to die. He's come back to die. He's returned to the mortal lands in order to fulfill his mortal destiny. This poem is called, frankly, calls it at the beginning, the death of St. Brendan. That's the theme of the poem, is St. Brendan returning to die. One last portion here. This is the monk, his interlocutor in the poem, speaking first. But men say, Father, that ere the end you went where none have been. I would hear you tell me, Father dear, of the last land you have seen. I should have said been the first time. My apologies. In my mind the star I still can find, and the parting of the seas, and the breath as sweet and keen as death that was born upon the breeze. But where they bloom, those flowers fair, in what air or land they grow, what words beyond the world I heard, if you would seek to know. In a boat then, brother, far afloat, you must labor in the sea, and find for yourself things out of mind. You will learn no more of me. So, St. Brendan redefining lost tales here. Like when St. Brendan loses a tale, it stays lost, right? He refuses to tell him anything more, right? The other monk wants to hear more about it, right? You have, ere the end, you went where none have been, right? Tell me of the last land. Tell me what you saw. Tell me more about, the lands that lie beyond the outer night, right? That you discovered. And he says, in my mind, I can still find that star and the parting of the seas. He doesn't say, I could take my ship out tomorrow and go back to the same place. It's in his mind. I still can find the star and the parting of the seas. And the breath is sweet and keen as death that was born upon the breeze. So what does he tell the other monk? You have to experience it yourself. I can't tell you about it. You have to experience it. I can still experience it. I can still hear it. I can still feel it, right? I can still smell it. I can still see it, find it in my mind. So that idea of like in his mind, finding the place of the parting of the seas, it's like in my mind, I can journey there again, right? I can re-experience that. I can smell those flowers again. But I can't convey that to you, right? I can't tell you what it was like. Closest I could probably come would be to say, smells like elves, right? But that's not going to do you very much good. And if you say that to people, they'll laugh at you. So yeah, you've got to, if you want to know what it was like, you've got to experience it yourself. That's where he ends. That's where the poem ends, right? I've come back to die. Again, he's not saying like I'm sworn to secrecy. He's not, forbidding any. In fact, he's doing the opposite of forbidding, right? His his friend, his follower, from following. He's encouraging his follower to follow in his footsteps. Yeah, Brian, it should remind us of Raymer's discussion of how you can either remember a dream or write it down, but in telling it, you lose the memory, and it becomes, the memory changes into what you, or rather the experience changes into the memory, right, into the narrative that you tell. Yeah, you can't communicate that. You just can't, right? And as I said, going back to that mechanism, right, that mechanism of space and time travel, it's St. Brendan has done something similar. St. Brendan's experience is something like Raymer's. I mean, he was sailing in a physical boat, apparently, right, and found the physical straight road, apparently. But there is clearly some similarity, Brian, exactly as you were implying there, between the experience that St. Brendan has had and the experiences that Raymer describes, right? He has been there, but it's not unlike how Raymer has been there. So Brian, exactly, at the end, he's refusing to give his narrative because he's choosing to hold the experience, right? Not putting it into words, and therefore losing it, or therefore having it reduced only to those words into which he put it, right? That narrative that he gives. He's going to keep more. Yeah, I think that seems exactly right to me. And again, he's not being selfish in doing that, right? Like, I'm going to keep it to myself and I'm not going to share it with you. He says, no, the only way you can, it's not going to satisfy you to hear a narrative, and it's only going to reduce my own experience of it. Really, there's only one option, right? Get a boat, get out there. Okay. So, to no one's surprise, I spent most of the time talking about the poem. It is getting late. Peeking ahead. Well, let's do this one, because this is them talking about the St. Brendan poem. They're talking about some of the medieval source material. Still, that seems to be where you got your volcano and tree from, but you've given them a twist that's not in your source. Yeah, it's not exactly a normal tree, and it's not exactly a volcano either. You've put them in a different order, I think, making the tree further west, and your volcano is not a hell smithy, but apparently a last peak of some Atlantis. And the tree in St. Brendan was covered with white birds that were fallen angels. The one really interesting idea in the whole thing, I thought. They were angels that lived in a kind of limbo, because they were only lesser spirits that followed Satan only as their feudal overlord and had no real part, by will or design, in the Great Rebellion. But you make them a third fair race. So here, and I'm forgetting who's speaking here. It's not, frankly, Marquezan, maybe? I can't remember exactly who it was speaking here. But anyway, he's referring to the voyage of St. Brendan, the medieval account of the voyage of St. Brendan, which he didn't like, right? He thought it was very unsatisfactory. But anyway, he's saying this was the one cool part, right? The one cool part from the medieval tale of St. Brendan is the bit with the tree, and how the tree, like the birds that are covering the tree, are actually fallen angels that lived in limbo, right? Because they didn't really make a moral decision themselves, but they kind of sort of quasi fell, right? And so from there, it's a very small step to saying actually they're elves, right? Especially since that's one of the theories that, about what elves actually were. Oh, it's Loudham speaking there? Okay, right. Okay, cool. So it's Loudham speaking in that first paragraph. But you make of them a third fair race. Huh, yeah, maybe so. And that bit about the round world and the old road, said Jeremy. Where did you get that from? I don't know, said Frankly. It came in the writing. I got a fleeting picture, but it's faded now. Yeah, can't imagine. Can't imagine where you got that, right? And how that comes in. Notice again one of the patterns here. This poem, St. Brendan, brought in by Frankly, apparently unrelated, right? Obviously not unrelated, but here we can see again, I mean, I remember I called this class ancillary myths, right? The St. Brendan story is being brought in where Tolkien is incorporating the St. Brendan's story and inviting us to see how it I was about to say how it connects to or feeds into the Atlantis myth, the Numenorian myth that he's been unfolding. Like it's the other way around. How when you take, that's the experience that Loudon is describing in that first paragraph. You take the St. Brendan story, the not really great St. Brendan story, from the medieval account, and you bring the Atlantis stuff into it. You bring the Atlantis stuff into contact with it, and now all of a sudden it's very different. The whole thing sounds different, right? You begin to discover things. You discover that the birds on the tree are not fallen angels; they're elves, right? You begin to discover that that thing that just looked like a volcano is not a volcano hellsmithy. Is in fact a last peak of some Atlantis, right? It's the Menel Tarma. Anyway, so, and the business about the round world and the old road, again, this is that glimpse of the myth in its original form, right? The truth behind it, kind of like the Anglo-Saxon page in Numenorian script is the truth behind the fragmentary myth of the crooked roads and the straight way. All right. Then I think we move on after that, right? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we will come back next time to we'll run fairly quickly through their account of their travels in Cornwall and Ireland, and then we'll get to Ælfwine, and in particular, what I'm going to be especially interested in is the story of King Sheev, which we didn't get to. So let me emphasize. Let me leave you with a question about King Sheev. What's going on in the story of King Sheev? How does that connect with the Numenorian story? If the Numenorian myth, as it is being revealed here through Loudon and Jeremy, especially by something like Raymer's method, if that Atlantis myth brought into contact with St. Brendan reveals these new things and helps us to understand and contextualize the myth of St. Brendan in this new way here, how does it help us with King Sheev, right? Where do we end up with the King Sheev myth based on, again, doing the same thing, bringing the Numenorian / Atlantean story into contact with King Sheev, which is like the story of St. Brendan the Navigator, a kind of independent, semi-independent myth, Germanic myth, of the foundling child who becomes the splendid king. As Tolkien would tell you, and as Christopher did tell you in the Lost Road notes, the King Sheev story, I mean, the beginning of Beowulf is a memory of the King Sheev story, the foundling child who becomes the great king, King Sheef of the Chafings, right? At the beginning of Beowulf. Sheev, it's like the same, it's an echo of that same story in the first 10 lines of Beowulf, right? So when we take what is being revealed as the true myth of Atlantis, of Numenor, which has exploded into the primary world already, and we bring that into contact with the King Sheev story, what do we learn? What do we find out? How do we understand the King Sheev story in this context? So we'll talk about that. Carry on reading. My plan, fingers crossed, my plan is to get through the Notion Club papers, the whole thing, to the end, in 2 more sessions. We're going to do 2 more sessions on the Notion Club papers, and then we're going to do the Drowning of Anadune. So we'll that's the plan. I'm pretty sure that's the plan, if it wasn't 3. Anyway, 2, or at most 3 more sessions on the Notion Club papers. So go ahead and read through to the end, I would say. Just keep in mind that's the pace that we're going to be on. I'm abandoning giving exact page numbers for the classes from here on in, but it's not too much text. So be prepared to go through the end of the Numenor section in the next couple classes or so. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Good night, and I will see you guys next week. Bye now.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.